We are going to talk about investment in Europe, about American companies going to Europe, about copycats there and beating that, about finding the ways to also, I think, expand the investment and innovation in Germany and in Europe itself, which I think is an issue, and other expansion around the world, and then the future. Seven Ventures is very, very experienced at helping companies come over to Europe. And so, Sasha, why don't you start and talk about what it takes, why American companies should consider this, and what the right timing is.
Yeah, I think there's mainly two things to consider, Jeff. It's first of all timing, and then how you go into Europe. And I think it's an analogy would be how you go into a club or a bar. You should go early, so you don't have to wait in line that long. And all the good spots are taken if you come late.
That's a very German way to look at it, if I may.
And you need a wingman, you know. And I think it's the same with companies coming to Europe. The costs of coming late increase, and I can talk about later about that in detail. And they increase rapidly, and sometimes you might not even make it if you come late. And secondly, it's always wise to partner to de-risk your market entry. That could be a media company, could be a strategic partner from the industry you're in, but it's much more risky to go without a partner.
Let's talk about one of the risks right now. Rightfully or not, Germany got a reputation, thanks to the Samwer brothers and Rocket Internet, for copying American companies and then selling the copies to the American company, eBay being the best example, but there are other examples as well. I don't know if that's uniquely German, or if it was more broadly than them, but they sure developed a reputation for doing that. Is that risk still exists today? If you don't get in time, is the copycat going to get in first?
Well, first of all, we're probably a little bit guilty as well. We supported Zalando, which was widely described as the Zappos clone, made it to $1 billion company. It's IPO'd now. And I wouldn't even, some people go as far as calling it stealing. I wouldn't say so. I mean, Mercedes is producing cars, and there's tons of others producing cars. So it's you know, just executing better on the same thing and faster. But it's, of course, the risk for the originals. So this risk, in my eyes, is increasing rather than decreasing. Because in the early days, you could just go in and then spend money on Google, and if you had the better product or service or value proposition, people would find you via Google AdWords and then maybe consume your product even if you went in late. Nowadays, the Google AdWords channel to me is dead because it's so expensive. The margin is always zero. You spend as much on the customer acquisition cost as on the customer lifetime value. So if you come late then, you know, you end up with a negative margin. So it's very important in my eyes to go first and position your brand as the first brand in the market.
So we have two companies here at various stages of this. Cyriac started Shopkick, and I think you helped them come to Europe. Talk about the experience of the international expansion and the timing and what worked and what didn't work, what advice you have.
Yeah, so we actually started the company in 2009, and we internationalized in 2014 by going to Germany as the first international market. So maybe contrary to what you just said, you know, I would say don't go to a club too early because it's kind of boring and empty, and it's kind of not very cool to be in an empty club. So you want to go when you're just at the right moment, when, you know, almost everyone wants to go, but you're just beating the crowd by a little bit. And maybe there are a few people already trying to do your thing. But you are stronger because you have so much experience already, and hopefully you have a technology advantage, and then you can go into the market. We did that together with Seven Ventures, with ProSieben, and brought Shopkick into Germany. At the time, Shopkick had about 10 million users in the US. And we went into Germany at the time when there were 4 clones, I believe, because Germany is pretty good at cloning, which in itself, you know, is fine, because I think new areas, new regions that are, you know, building up their own startup ecosystem are often starting with cloning, because it's the fastest way to get in, which is in itself okay, if it is followed up by a wave of innovation that comes afterwards. And I think Germany is overripe for a wave of innovation that needs to come from Germany, because Germany, you know, I'm German too, so I'm allowed to say that I live in Silicon Valley. but I'm still German. Germany has to have higher aspirations than that, and I think it's way capable of doing that. It's time for some innovation to come out of Germany.
Amen. And I want to come back to that topic because I think that's a huge topic on its own. But first, Gabe, and in full disclosure, Gabe is from Casper, and in disclosure and gratitude, I'm on a podcast network called Twit, where they are a loyal advertiser, and it really works. So Casper, if you don't know, is an amazing company that does what you didn't think was possible, a home-delivered mattress that pops out of a box in a dramatic way. Mattress shopping in the United States is just horrid because they make up brand names, they make up stuff, and you hate the experience, and it's awful. And so you changed the structure of how we think about shopping about a huge item like a mattress. What's your timetable with European or worldwide or European expansion, and how?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think maybe both points are valid. We hope to get to the club with enough time to get in, but not so much that it's just closing. So we launched just over 2 years ago now, and we've seen some really immense growth in the United States. Jeff, as you said, it's a huge amount of consumer interest. We've hit on a pain point that I think is really, truly global. The industry, no matter where you are, is kind of centered around poor product development, not really quick iteration, not a great consumer experience. And for us, we have this aspiration to really be a global brand around sleep. And we're making headway towards that in the US, but part of that is understanding, everybody in the world sleeps, of course, and almost everybody in the world sleeps on a mattress. So this is something that really is a universal need. And the opportunity for us to come in, there are certainly people in different ways disrupting in the space in lots of different markets, but for us, the ability to come in and build something lasting is really exciting. And that means building a team on the ground in Germany for us. Hopefully we will launch over the summer internationally. And it's investing in those kind of components that make you not just an outsourced, for us, American company into other markets. It's building a presence, understanding needs, understanding behaviors, and growing into it with people on the ground that can really help us succeed.
I've got to ask one question. Since Ariana Huffington has made herself the queen of sleep, have you talked to her about the product endorsement or anything?
Oh yeah, so actually last week we did the Sleep Symposium, which was a day-long event talking about the cultural implications of sleep, how it's related to technology in the bedrooms, and sort of like best practices, kind of, and she was our keynote speaker, so yeah.
I scolded Ariana in a post recently saying that in this political time, see earlier discussion of Donald Trump, we need the old political Ariana back more than ever, right?
Stealing her away.
We don't need another Oprah. So, Ellie, your perspective on this as an American investor, where do you advise your companies? What kinds of stories have you seen in terms of them being able to spread both ways?
Yeah. Sure, I think you've seen horror stories in both directions, right? Like going too early, spending a bunch of money, it being a failure, pulling out, and then you've seen folks who've gone early with the help of a local partner and been able to capitalize on kind of the brand that they've built elsewhere. For us, it's a matter of prioritization, and I think what it is, it's very company specific. So it's not an overarching, you need to go early, or no, the point of view for this particular company or this type of company is, oh, you should wait until you're at a certain point in revenue or a certain point in rollout. It's very company specific because the complexities are just so different. Are you a physical product company? That means that you need to build, you need a distribution center. You need to understand how you ship to and from. You obviously need to have a media strategy. There's a lot of things you need to do. If you're a B2B business, you probably get pulled there because your customers are there. So you're getting pulled there in some way, shape, or form, but that doesn't mean that you're opening an office necessarily. You can fake it for a little bit longer. So I think we've seen a wide range of approaches. The one that we've seen work most consistently is working with someone local. Whether it's a company that's already on the ground, like a Seven Ventures helping out, or Berta doing the same, but having the actual expertise on the ground, particularly for direct to consumer, so you can at least maybe you get a leg up in media, maybe you get an understanding of a local market and can actually use that foothold, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in the UK, to intelligently expand.
Sasha, I'm just curious, just to switch the funnel for 1 second. What about the companies you have in Germany and international expansion to the U.S.? I remember talking to Dr. Borda years ago about how America's just too hard. It's too big, it's too hard. I don't think we believe that, and I think we want to see more companies from Europe come over and compete here. What's your view on that reverse path?
Well, I think America has a great advantage in building consumer companies. And the most obvious advantages are the domestic market is so big. Then there's more investment. But there's one component that's frequently overlooked, which I think is probably the most important in that respect, and that's consumer behavior. So if you look at the rate of adoption of new technologies, new products, new services, the US is just not beatable, you know? Just look at fast food. American consumers jumped on fast food, created the largest fast food chains in the world. Then look at organic food and natural food. Europeans have been eating healthy pretty much for decades, but natural organic food didn't become a trend. People ate healthy, ate unhealthy, but you know, America created the $13 billion enterprise of Whole Foods. And I think these hype cycles in consumer behavior that created Starbucks, even though Europeans have been drinking coffee for decades, you know, that's something that pours a lot of money into consumer industries and allows companies to be created. A lot of them fail, but some survive and they become global enterprises. And that's why it's a lot harder for a European company coming late, not obtaining that sort of funding, and then even going to the large market of the US, where probable competitors in the place.
All right, well, let's now stay on this for a minute. It's a point that Cyriac raised earlier, and I'll come back to you in 1 second. The question of whether or not Germany, in particular Europe in general, is a good environment for innovation and investment. I have argued recently that the kind of war against Google that came out of Germany that led to the Leistungsschutzrecht, to the ancillary copyright, to the antitrust fights, and so on, have made it a rather inhospitable environment for innovation and investment. Now, separate from that, I've talked to many, many startups who say, listen, I can get my first round in Germany, but when the money gets bigger and the risk gets worse in that sense in dollar amounts, I got to go elsewhere. And so that's when they come to America to get investment, and there's thus an innovation drain out of Germany and out of Europe. So what is it going to take to get more capital risked in Germany and in Europe to get the kind of environment for innovation that Cyriac talked about? Why don't you take that first, and then we'll go across.
Yeah, I think it's improving already. More money is coming into funds. There's probably a new fund every week now in Berlin or other European cities. So it's starting to improve, and this growth and this improvement is exponential, because the more capital there is, the more capital will come. Let me explain that. If you invest in a company in an A round, you need to know, and this company is probably technological or capital intense, you need to know that there's enough B rounds investors to keep on funding that company. And if you're in the Valley or in the US, there are enough. And until now in Europe, there weren't. So your investment in this A round company is even riskier.
Well, what's the root cause of that? I mean, is it unfair to say that there's an aversion to risk?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, there's probably hundreds of factors leading to that, but I think it gets better now as more money comes in and we have the first successful exits and so on.
Ellie, as an investor first, what's your perspective?
Well, I think, so I actually was in Berlin last week. I just did an A-round investment there in January, a company called Blinkist. It's great, download it. But what I was struck by, and I met a ton of different companies, and now I go there at least quarterly, and I'm fine with it because there's so much interesting stuff going on. But what I asked everyone I met was, how long have you been in Berlin? And on average, it was 18 months. Right? I mean, so obviously transient, I mean, this audience understands it, but it's so early still in terms of the innovation. The cloning, you're right, that's been around a little bit longer, but it's still really early days. And if I use New York as a parallel, we still don't have expansion capital. Like, we've got A-round capital, but if you need B and you need growth capital, the vast majority of that is still a 6-hour plane ride away. So I think these things actually take a very long time. And while you need the seed and A investors to build in order to actually be able to support the companies that ultimately need the growth capital, so these things are in stages. But until there's enough of a base of companies that can support having a big fund that'll be in expansion rounds. You're not going to have it. I think it's a long way off.
And note that this week, NY Tech started as a new organization among companies and investors in New York to try to get New York built up as a better investment environment. All right, now, Siri. Now you've heard these perspectives and maybe excuses. You're both a German and a Silicon Valley investor. You started with the scold earlier. What do you say has to happen to make Germany and thus Europe a better environment for investment?
So I think it's two things. The first thing is you need exits. If there are exits, there will be money. And it's very simple. And I think the way you're going to get exits is actually by merging the topic of this panel with innovation. You're not going to get massive exits at the scale of the US or the Chinese market by starting in Germany and staying in Germany. You need to globalize and internationalize faster out of Germany than maybe you've ever done before as a startup. Because unfortunately, I've done a startup out of Europe too. My first startup was in Germany. And you literally have to start 6 companies in 6 different countries and build 6 client bases in order to get even close to the market size of the United States. So in order to actually create an exit that is relevant and that is massive, you need to do, as an entrepreneur, 2 things. You need to internationalize really quickly, find a really big market. That means the US market, probably not France, probably not the UK first. And I always hear this from German startup entrepreneurs. We're going to go into the UK next. We're going to go into France. Well, why don't you go into the US and go fast and send one of your founders to actually set up shop so that you have a presence on the ground that's meaningful? Or you go into China, and that's a different topic. So that's one. The second thing is the mindset. And in order to get to the mindset, you need to have entrepreneurs who think really big, where the aspiration is not, which inefficiency can I exploit that I can build a company around, versus how can I frickin' change the world? How can I build, what's the next Tesla idea? What's the next SpaceX? Where's the next Hyperloop? And how do we change the world?
All 3 of those coming from one person, yes.
All one person.
All you need is one of him and you're fine.
That's right. So how do we, or the next Amazon or whatever, how do we build a company that is going to have an impact that is so important that in 20 years from today, we're looking back and say, this company is amazing, and it has changed how we live and how we communicate or how we shop or how we drive or how we save energy or how we save money, but in a way that is substantial and also sustainable. So those are the 2 things. And then you need partners. I'm going to give some props to ProSieben, because not just because you sit here, but because of our experience with Shopkick. I would not be sitting here saying Germany was a successful, highly successful launch of Shopkick without ProSieben. You need people who are believing in new models and who are going behind it and have the scale and power to drive it up very quickly. Those are the kinds of partners you need in order to get going, and not the investor who gives you a little bit of money and then goes back home. It doesn't do anything. So, for example, Shopkick in the US was funded by Kleiner Perkins and by Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman and Greylock. Reid Hoffman started LinkedIn, and Kleiner did a lot of things with Amazon, Google, and so on. And their capital is more than capital. It is basically opening doors and giving amazing input on product. And you need people at VCs that actually have that kind of thinking. And at ProSieben, it was a combination of helping us open doors to retailers in Germany so that we could launch with, MediaMarkt, Saturn, Douglas, all on day 1 nationwide, and go live with a nationwide television campaign on the same day, and organize all of it together. And it was not just the media part. It was actually literally a 3-people full-time team from ProSieben that went out with us into the market. So if you combine these factors, the mindset, the globalization really early on with partners like them, then I think you're going to see a much different outcome in terms of exits. And when you see different exits, you're going to see funding. When you see funding, you see more and more boldness, hopefully on the investor side and the entrepreneur side.
So Gabe, give me, as a fresher younger entrepreneur here, your company being younger. Tons of pressure on you within this market, tons of pressure of fearing the right timing elsewhere. What market do you go to? Give us a sense of the prioritization you have to go through as a company to when you decide to do these things. I'm too damn busy building the company here. I can't expand. Oh God, I've got to expand. Where do I expand? Is it Europe? Is it somewhere else in the world? Just give us a little insight into your thinking.
Yeah, I mean, of course, right? Because everything you're doing is like, we're trying to avoid doing this at the expense of growing our US business. And I think there are a couple of factors that make that not necessarily the trade-off anymore. I think specific, to the point of trying to build 6 companies to equal the market size of the US, it's like some of the technological capabilities, especially for me in direct-to-consumer, physical goods, make it so that we can build, whether it's like payments or integrating with some sort of manufacturing facility or localization technologies, things like that, that really, if you do it right and you have the right mindset, can really build the platform in a way that can benefit, every single market that you're in, not just hopefully starting and over the next few years as well, not just like 6 really fully separate companies, but 6 separate perspectives on, the core.
What are the best kind of partners that you need to be able to expand in those countries, to Sarah's point, and to what?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're the kinds of partners who can really hone in on what customer behavior looks like and how it differs in the US and understanding how that our, offering relates. I think, as I said, it's really sleep is a universal need, but that doesn't mean that every single market is reacting to it in the same way. And that doesn't mean that your sort of, individual branding or the channels or anything like that are going to be the same from market to market. I think it's the kind of people that have grown up in these areas that know exactly what will, for lack of a better word, be cool and not be cool. That, coming in as a dumb American, you just wouldn't know.
So let's go a serious step ahead of me. This is great on this. Now let's go to the question of how you get these Elon Musk companies. How do you get these really audacious investments? What's it going to take to do that? We see incremental things. We see the effort from the EU to get a single digital market. We see, trying to bring barriers down. We see other things. But where's the real effort to bring in that kind of startling innovation? What's it going to take to do that? Where's that going to come from? Sasha, what's you're bringing companies over, which is great, but I'm sure you're right. You want to get that big investment there. Now, the truth is, I hear people complain that Europe doesn't have its Google, but if Europe invests at a rate, a fifth of or a tenth of what we invest in the U.S., you're not going to get that Google. What's it going to take to build that kind of environment and investment environment in your view?
I think we've basically said the most important things. It takes exits to create the success that attracts capital, and also, and we didn't say that so far, the entrepreneurs that contribute back to the ecosystem. One thing is institutional capital that comes with exits and comes with the environment that comes out of seed funds. But the entrepreneurs that build companies and then sell those companies and then contribute to the ecosystem.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg, isn't it? I mean, the problem is that, we need the big companies and the exits. We're not going to get the big companies until we get the big companies and the exits, right? So you're trying to work on incubating companies too, right? You have a competition we'll talk about a little later and show a video about. At the really early stage, at the Gabe Casper stage, what do you need to foster more innovation at that level?
Well, unfortunately, we need time. And I think Ellie's totally right. We can't force it overnight. And I think Europe is in a good way, especially if you look at the Berlin ecosystem. The flowers are growing. Sometimes you just need to let them grow for some time. And money, exits, and success will come, and the successful entrepreneurs.
So, Ellie, back to your point earlier about New York, as I'm acting all haughty about how we're better in the U.S. than the normal American way. New York is not Silicon Valley yet. We want to build that up. We care about New York. So the same question then. What's it going to take for New York to become a true competitor to Silicon Valley? What do we need here to do that?
Sure. I was thinking the unifying theme of all the things that we're talking about it's actually more like maturity of the ecosystem and less where we are, whether it's Europe, whether it's New York, whether it's St. Louis. So I think, in New York, we have some things going for us, right? I mean, we've got domain expertise. We have a lot of Fortune 500 companies here. People want to live here. We've got a lot going on. We need talent. We need to be able to confidently be able to scale a technology organization in New York. That we don't have that to the extent that we need it today. I think that there's a lot going on. Government's actually been very supportive in New York, and you can see it with the Cornell Technion and other things that are going on, trying to build a more sustainable base. So that's exciting, but again, that takes time. That's not, you don't just turn it on and then it happens. And then of course we need to continue to have exits, and I think one of the pushbacks on New York, or really any newer startup ecosystem, is that companies sell too early. And they don't necessarily go for it and go public. And you've had that discussion around a lot of the decent size exits over the last few years, whether it's MakerBot, whether it's Buddy Media, whatever it is. It's the overarching question you always get is, well, if this had been in the Valley, would they still be independent? Would they be pushed to be independent versus taking this outcome, which is still a big win, but it's not, that big public company or, kind of that stays and sustains the ecosystem, spins people off. You still get the benefits of the exit, but perhaps it's been a little bit early. So we still need to see those.
So with the time we have left, I think to turn to the future and talk about where the opportunities are going to be, because Reid Hoffman and Mark Andreessen say software eats the world, and if it can be solved by software, Silicon Valley is the place to do it. Good, all right, they've proven that. But there are other frontiers. Autos, Germany thought that they would have a role in that, and then you have damned Elon Musk does it again there. VR, AR, AI. David Kenny was here from Watson. Where do we think that the opportunities are going to be to say, all right, Silicon Valley does what it does, but we're going to grab another area of the future and make our role in that? And Gabe, why don't I start with you? Because you're going to, I'm sure, have a magnificent international expansion. You're going to have an exit. Then don't become an investor. Start another company. As you sniff around, you see where the opportunities are. What kinds of things do you see way out in the future where the opportunities could be, where your kid brother or kid sister, better yet, could see an opportunity?
Oh boy, it's a big one.
Yeah.
I think for us, it's around like building physical goods that can connect to an experience. Sleep is very much on my mind, right? It's like I live and, breathe and sleep.
Thank you for waking up to come here today. Yes.
So in our world, right, it's like, okay, think about all the factors that go into that, and maybe it's humidity and temperature and light and sound and things like that. And we are, a soft goods company right now, but then you think about technological innovation and, the frontiers of potential opportunities of a connected home or augmented reality or things like that. And it's like, if someone can crack this idea of, okay, can I sleep 15% better through some sort of passive way of, moderating the environment or some, wind down routine. I think that there is sort of this confluence of physical and digital that can relate to consumer behavior through like the actual purchase experience and lived experience of taking normal things and really trying to augment them with that kind of like.
Sirik, what are you looking at for when you're going to be my age?
All right. Well, do you want to take a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year view?
Your pick.
What was that?
Your pick.
My pick. All right.
Where can we find the next and new opportunities? Because what we see so often is you fight yesterday's war. Right? Google's not really a search company anymore. In Larry and Sergey's letter to their shareholders today, they kind of said, "Oh yeah, search, we still love it." Yeah. It's a phone company, it's a signal-based company, it's an automobile company, it's all kinds of other companies now. So Microsoft comes along, and what do? They start Bing to compete with yesterday's war.
Right.
So what are tomorrow's war? Where are the opportunities where you can go where you're not constantly trying to catch up, but you leapfrog?
So I think that we are, when you think about the future, you have to imagine things that seem very strange today. And like everything, like 20 years ago, there was no internet, there were no cell phones. We lived a completely different life. So if you think 20 years out from now, let's say 2036, 2040, When you think about that world and our little kids, they have now grown up and they have their own kids. So in that world, I think it will be a world where everyone has their personal robot. And I don't think any one of you is going to make their bed anymore or clean the kitchen or the bathroom every day again, the same monotonous, repetitive stuff that you don't like to do. Is there anyone in the audience who likes to clean the kitchen? Okay, so now imagine everyone of you has a robot, cleans your kitchen, and now you take that robot away. How does that feel? So in other words, this is going to be a massive change. It's going to be very important. That's just one area. Another big area is biology meets software. And I've been thinking about this for a couple of years, that when you talk about DNA, and we've all been a lot of us, especially in the investing world, have been disappointed in the progress of biotech, at least in terms of exits, right? So, and the reason why that is the case is it's really, really slow. What we have been able to do is identify the genome. We know how DNA is set up, but we have no clue what the language of DNA actually is or what it means. It's almost like having a thick book. Imagine a very large book, lots of pages, and there's lots of codes in it. We have no idea what it means. And the only thing that we do, the level of crudeness that we're at currently, is that we tear out a page of the book, and then we see what happens to the story. Yeah. Or we add another page, and then we see what happens with that. And then we do another trial and another trial. On page 5,456, we tear one out, and then we go 1,000 pages earlier and try that. So with that, we're not going to get anywhere. What we need to do is understand the language of DNA and the grammar of it. So now, you probably have seen this, Jarvis, because you're always at the forefront. So 4 weeks ago, there was an announcement by MIT that they have developed a programming language that allows you to code in a programming language that requires zero knowledge of biology. What a cell is supposed to be doing. In other words, produce this protein if that and this happens. And on the other side of the program, a DNA code is spit out that produces precisely that cell that can then deliver that. This was reported in Science magazine and so on. If it's all real, it could be the beginning of a massive revolution in terms of the speed of development. What if a high school student could develop cells? That's scary, but also really interesting. So essentially, we could bring the exponential speed of software development to the development of biology. And then if you take it further and you say, okay, the ultimate frontier here is age, right? So,
I'm afraid, yes.
So what if our children, when they're 35 or 40, my little son's here right now, he's 3. So if he's 43, he might live 150 years. It might be totally normal for him. And he might say, I can't believe that you guys, were actually not knowing at any given point in time whether there's a cancer cell in your body or not. How is that possible? How could you live like that? Or you threw all that stuff in your body, all the stuff you ate from the guy next door who owns a restaurant. You never met this person. You threw all that stuff in your body and ate it? So, every night we lie there, and these guys are making money in their sleep, which I just love. So every night we lie there for hours and hours, and that's a perfect time to scan the body and see what's going on there. So we have lots of opportunities.
So this time frame, in terms of investment and innovation, this time frame you picked is about how long, you think?
That's longer than 5 years. That's not the VC time frame.
Right.
And that's actually really important to point out, because if you make an investment now, I'm an angel investor as well, you got to look much shorter term. You look 5 years, 8 years out. You don't look 20, 30 years out. But I believe that if you don't have a view on what's going to happen later, even if you are 80% wrong, you still have to have a dream of where this is going to understand whether you believe it's in the general trend setting of where it's going. And so it's important to think further out. And by the way, it's just awesomely fun. And therefore, you have to do it even without any purpose of investing, just for the fun of it.
So Ellie, where do you think these frontiers are?
Yeah, I think that's all fascinating, and it's a lot of the stuff that we actually talk about all the time, especially on the automation side. right? Whether it's your own personal robot or really how you interact with technology today, which I think is just going to be different, and it's not going to be you searching on the third page of your iPhone for that app, right? These things are going to evolve incredibly, and it's going to be more kind of within the fabric of your everyday life, how you're going to be able to actually interact with technology and be able to do so in a frictionless way. And I think that's going to be, that's going to have implications to, when your commute, it's going to have implications within your home, within your workplace. Just overall, I think what's going on with Alexa is really, really interesting, and what Amazon's doing there. But that is early days. That is just the beginning. But I think it starts to paint a picture in a more mass way of where these things can go. So I'm interested in a lot of that automation. And I also think an area we're spending a lot more time is in digital health. But not just, but it is, again, a shorter time period, because that's the construct that we have to live within. So it is an incredibly huge market everywhere, incredibly inefficient. There's regulatory challenges, there's privacy challenges, there's an incredible amount of data that can be used, can be harnessed in order to improve things, but there's a lot of issues within healthcare being able to do so, which I think just highlights, and even some of the stuff that you're highlighting, it highlights the importance of having a dialogue with regulators, a dialogue with government about how these things are going to evolve, and what does that mean for privacy, and what does that mean for being able to actually innovate on some of these more breaking more bleeding edge frontiers. And we're not making these decisions in vacuums when we're engaging in conversations with regulators and with government, and I just think we're going to have such a big shift in how. And you're seeing it right now, specifically around self-driving cars, right? Like you're seeing that, and how do municipalities actually catch up with it? So I think that's fascinating, and I think we're gonna have to just completely reinvent how we're even engaging with government in these conversations.
And very different in U.S. versus Europe right now. Very, very different, and that has an issue. So I want to make that a second question for you, but I want you to answer the first question, Sasha, where you think the opportunities are first, and then we come back to the regulation.
I think the beauty in venture capital is that you could look at ideas that big, editing your DNA, that certainly have a great impact on our future in 20 years. And then you could look at ideas really, really small, like creating a directory of web pages and making it searchable, and then ending up with Google.
Or, God help you, Yahoo. But
worst case, Yahoo. So I think you can't really predict how big the company or the technology or the impact on lives of people will be in the beginning. Certainly if I tell you I make a directory and then I make it searchable, it doesn't sound as big as editing DNA, but look at Google and look where Google is going and where Google is going in medtech. That all originated from that simple idea. So I think it's very, very interesting to see how many paths there are that lead us into a very interesting future. Some seem very small, some seem a little bit bigger.
So now go to the government question, which I think Ellie raises, which is very important. You have Gotha Oettinger, who's a guest of DLD, who's trying to create a single market in the EU, and I think that helps reduce the friction. You also have a lot of regulation around health, around privacy, around other areas that has an impact on the environment to go invest in Europe. Talk about how you see the European regulation environment.
To be honest, it's quite difficult. And I'm a little afraid that Europe will be always late and misses opportunities. If you look at things like data protection and privacy, the laws follow behind reality. And American companies will just do it and then go to Europe, and then regulation will, in most cases, adapt to the new reality, but then no companies have been built in Europe. This is starting to get better, so I'm not trying to generalize all of that, but it's still a problem. And even in very niche areas like cannabis, the US is very surprisingly partly legalizing this industry. starting to build companies. Billions are being poured in this industry. And Europe, is still behind. I'm not saying it's the right way to go, but I'm just observing a pattern which prohibits commercialization of great ideas.
Given the state of our election, I think that's our excuse for using a lot of cannabis coming up. All right, I want to have a little idea here. So Howard Morgan said this morning that when he's asked people over the last year, where's the next Silicon Valley, he's never heard a European city. So fight that. If you're a startup, you're a brand new startup, give the sales pitch for why I should come to Germany or Berlin or wherever that is.
First of all, I'd agree with Ellie. You have to take it company by company, and the time of arrival should be matched to the company. If you're Magic Leap and there's like millions, hundreds of millions being poured into you, you probably don't need to be there on day one because nobody can copy you on day one. But if you're in an industry where you will have competitors, you should go to Europe. You should go there because there's like 700 million people living there with a high purchasing power. You could as well go to China, but then your risk profile is probably totally different. Talking about regulation, it's probably going to be a lot worse in China for some industries. So it's a very balanced territory where you do have a lot of people, you have a high purchasing power. The consumer behavior is different, but not totally out of this world. So it's probably a smart idea to go there.
I'm going to come to New York in a second, but I think I'm going to put you in the position of selling China to me as an alternative.
Yeah, so as much as it hurts me as somebody who is from Europe, as well as lives in Silicon Valley, the question that you posed was, where's the next Silicon Valley, not where's the next big market. So I believe that Europe is super interesting to expand into because it's a large purchasing power and it's a large market and you need to be there and you should expand. But if you're trying to answer the question, what's the next Silicon Valley? I believe in the next 10 years, there's only one other place that will actually be a true competitor or already is a true competitor of Silicon Valley, and that is Beijing. I just spent 3 weeks in Beijing and took a deep dive into the startup world there and in Shenzhen, which is the manufacturing capital of China. And it is startling and invigorating and exciting to see what's going on there. You literally have 5-year-old companies that started as a Groupon clone, then they started innovating really quickly and started changing the business model to a more sustainable model, and then added online ticketing, and then they added local food delivery, and they beat out 800 other startups in 5 years, and they're penetrating into a market, just to give it some perspective, in China. 1.3 billion people live there, we all know that, but how many of those actually have a smartphone, which means they are already in the addressable market? That's 530 million, and the US has 190 million, which means you're already talking about a 2.5x larger market today. And that company that I talked about, I know how many of you know Meituan? Meituan? Okay, it's worth $20 billion. And it is the 5th highest valued startup in the world. It's the 2nd highest valued startup in China after Xiaomi, which is the handset maker. And the company is driven by an entrepreneur who is doing his 3rd startup now, Xing Wang. He first copied Facebook, didn't really work. They copied Twitter, was shut down by the government. When they turned it back on, a competitor, Weibo, had already sprung up and overtaken him. And then he said, you know what? I think I'm going to do commerce because it's safer. And now he has Meituan. So in other words, what I'm saying is China is the big leagues now. Right. And in order to get there, for Europe to close the loop on this, in order for Europe to play a role, the internationalization piece of going global very quickly, combined with the aspirational thinking of creating big, important companies, that will catapult Europe forward. And I really hope to see it soon.
All right, as a proud New Yorker now, Ellie, beat them both and give me the sales pitch for New York.
Yeah, seriously. Well, there's other people who've made this pitch today, too. The one thing I'd like to say, I hate the next Silicon Valley question. It's not that. New York's never going to be Silicon Valley. New York's going to be New York. And I think that that's just generally true. I mean, you kind of play to your strengths. There's things that we're going to be very good at. It's probably, and there's things that Silicon Valley is going to be very good at, and the fact that those things are different is not a bad thing. So in New York, I mean, obviously we have industry, we've got domain expertise, we've capital, we've got opportunity. Most of your customers are here if you're a B2B company, if you're anything in media or advertising or even retail or financial services, you're here all the time. I think it's increasingly easier to start a company here, to build a big company here, to attract talent, and to do so hopefully at a bigger and bigger talent base. But I think that there's still a tremendous amount of momentum in New York as a startup ecosystem. I think the next 5 years are going to be big. I hope the next 10, 15, 20 are even bigger.
Amen. Hey, New York. Sasha, we want to end with a video from ProSieben from Seven Ventures. Do you want to explain what this is?
Just play it.
Okay. Can we go to the video, as they say? I don't think
we have seen hundreds of success stories over the years. Disruptors and visionaries who have changed entire industries. All over the world, companies are competing against each other to win customers' attention, because in the end, the winner takes it all. Pitch us your vision on how to become a European market leader. Compete and win a full-service media package. 3 million euros TV media. 200,000 euros of online and 70,000 euros of digital out-of-home media, as well as the creation of your own TV spot. Consumer startups from all over the world and across all industries apply now at www.7ventures.de. The best startups will be invited to the 5th 7 Venture Pitch Day from June 16th to 17th in Munich, taking place at the DLD Summer Conference. Be hungry, driven, and determined to beat your competition in a live, on-stage battle. Let Germany be your gateway into the European market.
So, now you can come and make a fortune with a base in Europe. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your attention. And